Chapter 17 is kind of a catch-all chapter for leftover things to be discussed. We need to discuss the second aorist and what we call liquids. And liquids pertains to both first aorists and future. So it's a mixture of topics in chapter 17. When we look at our handy-dandy table, we see that the second aorists are part of the third principal part. What is distinct from the first aorist is that it doesn't have a tense suffix. The sigma alpha is not part of the composition. We also see that the second aorist has the thematic vowel because the sigma alpha is not present, and therefore the alpha does not serve as a built-in thematic vowel. But what is similar to the first aorist is that the endings only account for the active in the middle. So similar to the first aorist, the past tense is referred to, or the past endings are relegated to the sixth principal part. You see that here, the aorist, and there you have it. And both build off a different tense suffix, whether it's first or second aorist, but we'll get to that later on. So second aorists are pretty much your irregular aorists. They resist development with the aorist suffix. Another way to look at it is to look at our morphology. So the second aorists have the first box because it has the augment as a time indicator, past time indicator. We still have not seen the reduplication. We have a tense stem, and you notice here that you have bal instead of lu, and that is to show you that we have a different tense stem altogether. We don't have the tense suffix sigma alpha. We have a thematic vowel, OAA, OAO, and that is because we cannot use the alpha of the sigma. And then we have secondary endings, and we will talk a little bit later on about how that differs from the first aorist. You pretty much have to memorize second aorist tense stems, and so it's important for you to take a good look at table 17.2 on page 256, second aorist stems. So notice that some of them are quite familiar. They reoccur a lot in the New Testament. Familiar ones, common ones, are aginomai and aginomene, erkomai and elthon. You can imagine those are frequently seen words in narratives. Let's see, lego and ipon are seen frequently, and so orao and idon as well. So please memorize those. Then looking through the parts, of course you have an augment, no suffix, thematic vowel, and then for inflection we use the secondary tense. So now we have a problem, right? Because we use an augment, we use a secondary tense, we do not use the sigma alpha. In short, the second aorist looks a lot like, pretty much looks like, the imperfect. So how does one differentiate between an imperfect verb and a second aorist verb? Well, one cannot, unless you have memorized the verb stem as being second aorist. Okay? So be sure to do so. What do paradigms look like? Well, here you see an example from Ebalon. Look at the augment. Look how it just repeats. It's pretty nice and clean. And so all we have to look for are those secondary endings. But notice here that because there is no sigma alpha suffix, that we see the first person singular simply using the nu that we knew from the imperfect. There's no exposed sigma alpha. And so that means that the first person singular looks a whole lot like the third person plural. So the context here will have to provide insight into what is what. The second aorist middle indicative, also very clean, very consistently moving along. The second person singular ending in a diphthong. Be sure to add for myself. Then let's switch topics here and talk about liquid verbs. And the reason I guess this pops up here is because we have completed our discussion of aorists and future verbs, the undefined actions here. And we need to talk about what happens when you encounter a future or aorist tense stem that ends in a liquid consonant. We've talked about contract verbs, those verbs that end in a short vowel. We've also talked about those verbs that end into a stop consonant. But what if instead they end in a liquid consonant, lambda, mu, nu, or rho? And you can already see it coming. We add the sigma and the sigma alpha to it, and liquids are simply just a pain. So you can imagine that at times there could be interesting interactions there as well. And in that lies the key in saying at times, because Stevens tells us not all verbs that have stems ending in a liquid consonant, however, are liquid verbs. So not all words react. So it's important to know which ones do. The ones that do not react, examples of non-liquid verbs, are, for example, ginomai, thelo, melo, ophilo, and chairo. But here are examples of liquid verbs as we encounter them in Scripture. Notice iro and aro and era. And now you see what some of those words that go across your piece of paper when you look at the principal parts just seem to be all over the place. Well, some of them are liquids, or some of them have hidden stems. So familiarize yourself with the different forms here. Also, you may already have seen that for the future those liquid verbs all have circumflexes. Do you see that? And here you see a lot of alphas. What you don't see on either side here are sigmas, because the sigmas drop out against those liquids. And that's how you recognize those forms. So liquid verbs lose the sigma tense suffix indicator. You can slip on them though, so we need to try to recognize them well. Sometimes they use a different tense suffix like epsilon sigma, or real funky ones. We just have to learn those by observations. Once the sigma drops out, there could be a leftover epsilon, and so those will then contract. And you get some resulting forms that could be kind of confusing. The liquid future looks like a present tense epsilon contract verb sometimes, with one distinction. It probably has that circumflex. So there are times that the only thing that clues you in is the accenting. Look at that. Meno and meno. The present tense, I remain. And the future, I will remain. One has an acute, one has a circumflex, because it's a liquid future. Liquid aorists, likewise, will drop the sigma alpha. So you still have an augment, but they will call it an asigmatic aorist. It will hold on to the alpha, but the sigma has dropped out. See that? So you can recognize still that it is an aorist because now it has a sigma sitting, a sigmaless suffix sitting here. So you see the alpha rather than its omega form. But some don't want to let go of the sigma and just resist it with all their might. And one way to do that is to put a strong sound in between, like so, thelo. So you get a long augment here, a, the, lesa. Look at that. You get the sigma alpha. It would sit against that lambda. You would think, well, maybe it just drops out the sigma, but no, this one wants to hold on to it, so it puts that eta in between. Sometimes you also see compensatory lengthening when this happens to the aorist. So we had the liquid future, right, from meno to meno. When it goes to the aorist, you add an augment. we add the sigma alpha and the sigma drops out, and then as a result, to make up for the loss of the letter, the preceding vowel lengthens, in this case to a diphthong. And so you have to just get used to recognizing what has happened there. And so in order to deal with that, fill out this little questionnaire here so you become comfortable with all its features.